Welcome to Concrete Block, the podcast where we dive into the latest news and current events from around the world. We're starting off with a developing story out of Hungary, where the country's new Prime Minister, Péter Magyar, is locked in a heated standoff with President Tamás Sulyok. The conflict began on election night, when Magyar used his victory speech to demand the resignation of Sulyok and several senior judicial and institutional figures linked to the previous Fidesz administration. According to reports, Magyar has accused Sulyok of being a puppet president, acting on behalf of former Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, who ruled Hungary for 16 years. The Prime Minister has given Sulyok a deadline of May 31st to resign, warning that he will use his party's two-thirds parliamentary supermajority to amend the constitution and remove him if necessary. Sulyok, however, has refused to back down, defending his constitutional role and dismissing Magyar's demands as politically motivated. The president has also pushed back against what he sees as a reinterpretation of presidential powers by the new government. This confrontation has already led to some unusual moments, including a ceremony where Magyar and his ministers refused to take photos with Sulyok after being appointed to their positions. The state news agency was even accused of cropping Sulyok out of an official picture. As this story continues to unfold, it's clear that the stakes are high. The outcome could have significant implications for Hungary's institutions and its relationship with the European Union. We'll be keeping a close eye on developments and bringing you updates as more information becomes available. We'll be right back with more of today's top news on Concrete Block. Welcome back to Concrete Block. We're diving into the world of international diplomacy and defense today as Bulgarian Prime Minister Rumen Radev made his first foreign trip since taking office to Berlin, Germany. This visit was significant, not just symbolically, but also in terms of what it reveals about Sofia's position on Ukraine, defense spending, and the EU's next 7-year budget. Radev met with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and their discussion covered a range of topics, including defense cooperation, industrial policy, and the EU's financial framework. The Bulgarian Prime Minister emphasized his country's desire to deepen defense ties with Germany, as well as to play a bigger role in European arms production. He highlighted several joint projects with German companies, including the production of gunpowder, ammunition, and anti-ship missiles. One of the key points of discussion was the EU's defense industry, with Merz criticizing the continent's fragmented approach to defense production. He argued that European sovereignty requires European capabilities and capacities for defense, and that the current system produces too many systems in quantities that are too small. Radev agreed, stating that Bulgaria wants to participate in both the design and production of defense systems rather than just procuring them from other countries. The two leaders also touched on the EU's next budget cycle, with Radev arguing that the current formula would leave Bulgaria facing a sharply higher contribution, alongside the costs of euro adoption. He defended preserving cohesion policy and the common agricultural policy, even as Brussels shifts resources towards defense and competitiveness. Merz warned that negotiations over the next MFF would be difficult and could drag on through the end of 2026. The most significant divergence between the two leaders came on the topic of Ukraine. Radev called for diplomacy to begin as soon as possible, urging talks between Kyiv, Moscow, Washington, and Brussels. However, Merz responded more bluntly, stating that diplomacy could only progress if Russia first stopped attacking civilian targets. The Kremlin, he said, had answered every peace initiative so far with heavier strikes. As we watch the developments in this story, it's clear that Radev's language on Ukraine will be closely scrutinized by other European capitals. Will his calls for diplomacy evolve beyond the Berlin podium, and what implications might this have for the EU's approach to the conflict? We'll be keeping a close eye on this story as it unfolds. Welcome back to the Concrete Block. As we wrap up today's show, we're taking a closer look at a fascinating development in the Middle East. The Iranian government has launched an insurance service called Hormuz Safe, aimed at shipping companies and cargo owners navigating the Strait of Hormuz. This strategic waterway has been a major point of contention between Iran and the U.S., with Tehran effectively shutting down the strait since the U.S. and Israel began airstrikes in February. According to reports, Hormuz Safe will provide cryptographically verifiable insurance policies for shipments passing through the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, with payments settled in Bitcoin. The service is expected to generate over $10 billion in revenue for Iran, although it's unclear how this figure was arrived at or what the exact mechanics of the system will be. It's worth noting that the use of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin has become increasingly popular in Iran, particularly since the U.S. imposed sanctions on the country's economy and energy exports. However, the volatility of Bitcoin may raise concerns about its suitability as a means of payment for shipping insurance. The Iranian government and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps have been exploring ways to formalize control over the Strait of Hormuz, including imposing tolls and fees on commercial vessels. The introduction of Hormuz Safe may be seen as an attempt to legitimize these efforts and create a new revenue stream for the country. As the situation in the region continues to unfold, it's essential to consider the potential implications of this development. Will foreign ship owners be willing to use a Bitcoin-based insurance system, given the risks associated with breaching U.S. sanctions on Iran? How will the international community respond to Iran's efforts to assert control over the Strait of Hormuz? These are just a few of the questions we'll be keeping an eye on in the coming days and weeks. That's all for today's Concrete Block. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, stay informed.